Hello and welcome back to the Age of Sombros YouTube channel. Last time we did one of these, it was still Age of Bison. So that's kind of shows you the gap of time that we've had in between. But we are back with just a slow podcast episode for our little community here in Age of Empires 3. And of course, I am joined by the one and only Platypus Slayer, who him and I kind of run this shindig. We are the ones who our thoughts matter, and everybody else is just forced to listen.
Or we're the only two arrogant enough, right, to subject people.
Hey, listen, anybody else has well, I can't speak for Europeans, but we have freedom of speech here in America. And speaking of America, I'm going to crack this beer open really quick.
Nice.
Oh, frick yeah, man. I'm drinking Pool Party by Sam Adams. A citrus hazy pale ale. Let me take a sip. Oh, it's an IPA. That's not too bad though. I'm not a big IPA guy. What about you? I think you like IPAs, right?
I do. I mean, I don't like, if I'm planning to get, drink a bunch at once, then no. But I definitely like IPAs and like a nice warm summer day. Like a cold IPA on a nice summer day.
Have you ever had a warm IPA? It tastes like an armpit. If you have a warm IPA. You ever had that?
Yeah, I've never looked at a tree and been like, man, I wish these pine needles were a little bit warmer.
But yeah, as I was saying, we're, anybody else is welcome to put together a podcast on Age of Empires 3, all, 6,000 of us? But we're the ones with the...
Actually, 6,800. Okay.
Okay.
So.
Hey, we might as well round it up. 7,000. Good job, everybody.
Okay, I wish close to 10,000.
I wish I had one of those, kazoos, right? Like, with the little party favor that shoots out. Boo! Like, every time we hit some sort of goal, right?
Right.
I think this one was kicked off... we usually don't do these frequently simply because it's not like a scheduled show. It's more of when a topic piques our interest, we want to suddenly have a conversation. Or also if just time passes in the game, I feel like sometimes we're just like, let's take stock of things and kind of remand what we said in the past. And I think there was a conversation in our Discord, by the way, link in the description, where we were discussing revolutions, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of people seem to be like, there needs to be less revolutions, like it's an unfair mechanic. The idea that there's this unpredictability that exists in the game in which a civ can just switch up, and it ruins the very nature of an RTS. Now you're very old. So you played other games that are in the real-time strategy genre, and you like to talk about AoE 2 and StarCraft and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting to me, just I think we will start the conversation there of can we talk about, do revolutions actually destroy the RTS mechanic, and therefore by extension exactly what is RTS in the context of Age of Empires 3, because I think we talk about well, this is an RTS game, and it's yeah, well, what does that really mean for Age of Empires 3? We can have a broad definition of what RTS is, right? But then its application is going to look a little different every time.
Right. I think for starters, with Age of Empires 3, give a brief overview. The revolution mechanic was introduced back in the War Chiefs originally, right? You would actually have a revolutionary leader. Your home city would change. He would have very few cards. I think it was 5 or 6 cards for most civs, or revolutions, I should say. And the design of it originally was kind of like an all-in, right? It was a way to sacrifice all of your economy for one final push, basically. And the game, you either won or lost on it. Those that played Age of Empires 2 would be familiar probably with the Flemish. But really, that came after. This was a pretty revolutionary mechanic. I think Ragnarok from Age of Mythology was the closest thing that existed, at least in popular RTSs. I'm sure someone's going to come out and be like, oh, this one Polish obscure RTS did it first. And I'm like, hey, the Poles are great at RTSs, but not all of us know. Anyways, getting back on track there. So when DE came, revolutions have been revamped extensively. Now we have economy revolutions or economic revolutions. Ones that like through like the Dutch South Africa one, which isn't just Dutch, it's British too. Um, and all the revolutions that existed not only got more cards for that all-in push, but they also got ways to bring back their economy. Whether it's through citizenship cards, which allow you to retrain stuff, just like shipments. Like I believe Argentina or Chile can get settler wagons, or through like existing trickles. For example, if Italy revolts to Argentina, it still has all of its Lombards, right? So it's still capable of doing stuff. If you're Dutch and you revolt and you have banks, you still have your banks. And now you have cards to take advantage of that. Cards that may be really powerful but require a lot of resources. Whereas before your economy would just instantly flatline, now you can actually kind of sustain the revolution. And so I think this has caused a lot of a stir because it's a combination of things, right? It's old versus new. Now, what used to be like a Hail Mary all in push is almost like you're kind of changing your civ halfway through the game, if that makes sense.
Well, what would you say to something like the two examples, the glaring examples that kind of come to mind, as opposed to what was, I guess, the original intention behind the mechanic? We have Canada, right, which allows you to maintain your Coya de Bois, but they renamed them, I forget, something else.
So Voyager or Matisse?
Yeah, the Voyager or something. I think the Métier Voyager or something like that. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay, if you're in the comments, you're like, actually, it's okay, cool. So you keep your settlers, and then the most, I think, like popular right now in terms of our community conversations is obviously the French Revolution, right? Because then you just get your sans-culottes, and that's it, and then they're basically just a good, strong, like musketeer kind of unit that you can use to push if you want, or they can gather, build field hospitals kind of thing. And so, what would you say to that? Because obviously, like, there are revolts where I can ship in, like Argentina, I can ship 6 settlers in and start to slowly build the eco back, or something like that, right? And then somebody could argue, or like with Brazil, right, you can slowly build your eco back, but then somebody could argue, well, yeah, but like it's still just the initial shot in the arm. It takes a long time to get your settlers produced again. Like, that's kind of silly or whatever. Now, I guess you could counter, like, well, you have this massive army. Nobody can push you, so you can actually delay the game another 10 minutes and get the eco back if you're like wanting to play it that way, I guess. But, what do you say to those two revolts where it's like, no, I have a revolution and I keep my eco?
Well, I would say that Revolutionary France, I think, is actually quite well designed. And the only complaints I really see about it is, I don't know if it's a bug or a feature, but when you click the Napoleonic era card, which is almost like a mini Age 5, right? In that it unlocks even more cards, some very powerful cards for France. When you get the Sans Colette, you actually do permanently hobble your eco. You don't have a capital, which I'll get to later. You are essentially like, for like half the resources, roughly a little bit less than half of the resources to go Age 5, you get like a mini Age 5. So it's very interesting, and I haven't seen really too much complaints about Revolutionary France, because what you're doing is you're hobbling your economy permanently in exchange for being able to fight more effectively. Like, those sans-culottes are gnarly. I mean, they're like mini ranged Nizam.
Yeah.
For those that are familiar, basically have multipliers against heavy infantry, and they can get multipliers against artillery, and get extremely beefy stats for 100 something food. It's amazing. You know what I mean? Like, they absolutely can turn, like, if you just get wiped, but you have a big economy as France, that's normally kind of GG, because your army is expensive and it takes time. But you can actually just click this revolt or time it right, where you kind of wear down the opponent with the first wave, then you revolt, and now they are in deep trouble, and your whole composition kind of switches. This is definitely kind of going back to the key issue: is it strategic or not? At least from the revolting players, from France players' side, it's actually quite strategic, because you're kind of, you have to time it right. If you don't have enough economy, you're not going to be able to sustain that revolt. Or you're not going to go anywhere with that revolt. If you have zero military, if it's like an army of lancers, they're still going to eat you alive. But if you time it just right, where you can kind of trick your opponent into a composition or a timing that he doesn't know is going to benefit you greatly by going to this revolt, it's a game winner. Canada is a little bit different because Canada is more of a niche one, because Canada's excellent on maps with good natives. It's kind of like, everyone knows that France has good native cards. France takes that identity of good strong villager and good natives and just like cranks it up to 11 at the expense of almost anything else, right? So again, as a French player, you kind of have to like know when those compositions are going to be game winners for you. Like, when do you really need like fencibles, good natives, and some really good villagers to do fights? The truth is, it's not every matchup, but it is something that you as a French player can do to kind of disrupt traditional meta. Instead of just doing Age 4 Skirm Goon or Musk Falk plus Cure and cannons, like, you can completely lean into a new mechanic, with the caveat being like that is it. Like, your lane is those things that I mentioned earlier, and you have no way out. Like, if for whatever reason your opponent's able to comp switch into something that can handle those things, you're dead. You're dead in the water. There's nothing else. So from like a strategy perspective, and I think I will kind of play devil's advocate here in a second, a lot of these revolts, like playing as Spain and going to Age 4 and figuring out if you want to go Argentina with its Granaderos, or Chile with its Hussar of Death, or Mexico, which is just kind of a crazy one, or even United States, which kind of is crazy. Like, there's a lot of strategy and depth, because each of those revolts, is a trade-off. Now, some would say it's not a fair trade-off to your opponent, but it is a trade-off that you have to make as a player. And I think in that regard, this brings incredible depth to this game. I'm happy to see revolts being used. Full disclosure, I'm not as active these days, so people that are on the ladder are probably like chucking their drinks at the screen right now, because I think a lot of people are extremely frustrated by this mechanic. But to look at the merit of it objectively, as someone that's not getting brutalized by Granaderos every other game, I think this brings a lot of depth to this game. And that's been the biggest complaint of DE that I've heard, or one of the biggest ones, besides bad UI, and we need more social stuff, and we need better pathing. But from a balance perspective, people have said DE just added breadth, not depth. And revolts are finally sinking in to these mechanics, whether it be natives, whether it be units with several abilities, whether it be units filling multi-roles that were never filled before in the game, and cards that like you normally wouldn't see outside of Treaty. All of these things kind of work together in the revolt. So I'm going to start with the positive of revolts. I don't know what you think about all the stuff I just said.
Yeah, I think that I would agree that it does add a great deal of depth. I think that there's this mechanic that exists, and this is like, I think, a larger overarching conversation that I think we'll keep going back to. But when you're a developer and you put something in the game, you want people to use it. It's not like you do all this work just to say like, well, it's a nice option, that we've created all these other like civs within civs that nobody is going to use except for like very specific kinds of circumstances that may or may not arise. I think there's an incentive by the part of the developer to say, no, we've made something really cool here. We have something to share with you, and we want to encourage that kind of play. And so how do you do that? But, just kind of develop it so that it has a kind of strong viability for a lot of situations in which a player may find themselves and say, hey, like, this is something that could actually really be play tested and used. And I think, that's really great. I think that it's like, I think the French Revolution is probably the best thing in the game, personally. I think it's exciting. I think these things are flashy. I think that it kind of tickles the mind a bit in terms of like just the kind of zany and crazy that you want to see in a game that makes it more entertaining. And when you can pull it off, it's really cool. But then it kind of still takes us back to this idea of like, it takes two to tango, right? In a 1v1. And we can't just always be so overly concerned with like my personal experience. Well, I like the Argentina revolt, and that's what matters. It's like, well, there's somebody else on the other side of this, and it's like, when you have so many mechanics and you're trying to encourage people to have viability in all of them, well, then it's kind of hard to like imagine a sort of scenario in which there's viability for everything all at the same time, if that makes sense. And so that's why I'm kind of teeing you up for like, I want to hear your counter to what you were saying about the revolts.
Well, because like you said, like imagine being on the other side, okay, of, we'll say Spain. It's easy to pick on Spain because Spain has access to so many revolts. Now, let's say a game for Spain and another civ that I think is pretty close to what people consider as strong, which is Lakota on the current maps, right? You're up against Lakota. Lakota kind of is boxed in a lot of ways, even though like tactically it's a nightmare to fight. Like you kind of know, cav plus infantry. They're either going to club rush you or run around with axe riders or run around with bow riders. They have a few tricks like the rifle rider switch, or they can kind of do some goofy booms. But you can anticipate, and all these tech switches take time. Now, if you're against Spain, which already actually has quite a bit of uniqueness, right, for a European civ, it goes to age 4. It's pretty hard to push Spain because of a variety of mechanics, so it can consistently get to age 4. And now you're Spain's opponent. They're going to age 4, and they're showing signals of it's going to be a revolt, right? Like they're not counter pushing, they're not massing, right? Okay, so now what? Well, they can go Argentina. Okay, well, Argentina, the only counter, even close to the counter that you can do against them is goons and or skirm. But they can also go Chile, which has Uberhuss, which will kill all the skirms and even your muskets, anything but basically halbs, plus some really nasty artillery shipments, okay? Or they can go Mexico and stomp you with Super Soldado, or they can go United States and do like a mini, carbine plus a sharpshooter plus Gatling plus, I don't know, for some reason, spies. I mean, there's all this like, or grenadiers, like there's all of these like things, and you have a very small window as the opponent to come up with the effective counter, like 5 minutes or less. And I think that is, from the opponent's perspective, you are just kind of guessing. Like if you're not Spain, you're into Spain, he's going to revolt, but there's no way to tell which revolt it is, other than sometimes if they have a few extra Huss, that's usually indicative of Chile. But again, they could be hiding them, or, unless you're suiciding your army constantly, or you have like a map hack civ, there's no strategy. You're just kind of waiting. The initiative is gone, and now you have to just kind of sit there and boom or age behind it, but like the initiative is gone. And I think that's a really unfun feeling to be in. And I think that's why people are getting so frustrated with revolts, is because when a revolt is at least an all-in, you can kind of back up and say, okay, regardless of what revolt it is, it's going to have a bunch of revolutionaries and a few super units. So as long as I have a pretty reasonable comp, I can outlast this, right? As long as I don't let my eco get nuked, as long as I don't slip up and take bad fights. And, I might have to work harder, but the game will very soon switch back into where I'm the one that doesn't have to work so hard. Now it's like standing in front of a tidal wave, knowing that there's going to be no more tidal waves coming, and it's like you don't even know the direction. Like you're just standing on the beach, closing your eyes, blind, and being like trying to brace for which way it's going to go, and if it's the wrong way, you're going to be swept away. If you make the wrong units against Argentina, even if Grenadaros get nerfed, you're just going to die because the unit pops are so powerful from it. And it's not just Spain, like Brits can go Canada or South Africa. So Brits, which have a bunch of settlers by nature, if things are going well, they can either just FI traditionally, or they can hit you with like an eco civ where they're hitting you with Imperial war wagons and capital techs and banks on top of all of the Brit cards. Or they go Canada, where suddenly they like have super natives and all those villagers are super tough. Like, and I think that because it's not clear or indicative always of what revolt you're going to get faced with, that the more that these revolts get specialized, the less fair it becomes to your opponent. Like, balance aside, whether a revolt is 100% balanced or not, as a player, it makes you feel like you're losing out in strategy. You are now gambling, and that's just not always a great feeling to be on the receiving end of.
So, what you're describing, though, people would just say, listening to this, they're like, well, that's just what you're up against anytime you face a Mexico player.
Mm-hmm.
Like that sort of unpredictability, shot in the arm, coin toss on, you are on the receiving end of the coin toss, and somebody's flipping the coin for you and knows what the coin flip is going to be. It is something that you're dealing with Mexico every time. Now, there's some like little things that you can kind of predict, like when you talk to a Mexico main, they're like, okay, well, he revolted to Baja, so you need to look for these things, because then it can kind of tell you what kind of Baja you're playing. You're like, oh, cool, there's like 2 to 3 different kinds of Baja within the revolt. Fantastic. And there's a lot to be discussed there with Mexico, in terms of the unpredictability of the revolts in that case, and then the fact that they go return to Mexico, which puts them in H4 for whatever reason, and then there's lots of things with that, and we can get into that. But on a grander scale, then, is what you're saying is this idea that any civ really can kind of coin flip, and that leaves you on the receiving end. Now, the counter argument, though, to you, and this is something that Lionheart says, and we're going to talk about Lionheart in a second, because I think his finger is on the pulse when it comes to the whole revolt thing, and it leaves a desired question about balance and the state of the game, and just like perceived balance and perceived state of the game as well. But all that to say, essentially, is that the counter argument that he gives is that if somebody revolts, then you just revolt. Like, the best counter to a revolt is just to revolt. And so the counter argument to you is to say, okay, well, like, oh, you're complaining, but you can just revolt. And I'm like, well, does Lakota get a revolt? No.
Literally not at all. Yeah.
So, like, what's your deal? Like, okay, well, there's your counter argument then, because what are you gonna say? Well, then don't play Lakota. It's like, well, we're not having a conversation then at that point.
I would say so. Like, to Mexico's defense, kind of the unpredictability is kind of a civ design to its core, right? Like, the joke is, like, you can't counter Mexico main's plan because they don't have one. They're just kind of like, I'm going to send some stuff, see what happens. And I don't think that's unhealthy, per se, to have in the game. In fact, over time, I think as Mexico's gotten, like, nerfed, thankfully, repeatedly, into some level of reasonability, it doesn't have the same ire outside of treaty, because it's, it can do all of its tricky stuff, but it's kind of the civ identity, and then within it, it's still the revolts that people still hate, right? Yeah. I feel like there is some truth to what Lionheart is saying, in the fact that people do kind of have to get with the times. Like, if you want to be a competitive AoE 3 player, like, you have to use all the tools, and all the good ones, it's kind of become a joke. But if you've noticed, almost all of the good players do something that the majority of other players consider lame, while calling other players out for stuff that they and others in the majority consider lame. Like, it's just kind of the nebulous nature. So when you get to something like revolts, balance aside, it's a very subjective experience. And I think that when it was like a rarity, nobody was really that upset. But now that it's so common, people are kind of questioning, like, how much do we have this, or if this is the level, there has to be a better way to implement this. Because people get tired of, it's the same reason people got tired with the revolts and the FI metas of the past, that always seem to kind of creep back, it feels like, in this game. Although right now I must say it's the least I've seen it in DE since, like, release, is this idea that my opponent can sit in his base and he doesn't have to macro as hard, and he doesn't have to make as much units or upgrade or think as hard as me. He just has to run to age 4 and click a button, and then click a few more buttons, and he's just, like, done it better and easier than me. And I have to say, for some revolts, that is kind of true. Like for Spain into Argentina, like for the same ire I used to give Ottoman players, it's essentially the same. You watch them on the ladder from every elo from 1,000 to 2,000. They sit in their base. They go 3 villagers, capitalism, 5 villagers, or sorry, 700 coin, 5 villagers, 700 wood. I think it's either 1,000 food. I forget which crate they send, but it's usually a fort, then a crate to go up to H4, and then they either revolt instantly if they're under pressure, or they just wait till they can get 2 factories, and then revolt, and then they just kind of select all and go have fun.
Right. And then if anybody says that, like, I just want to get out in front of this, like, if anybody says, well, the strategy is in having chosen to revolt from the beginning, right? That you had to kind of plan out your defense and then plan out that you were going to revolt. That was the intention. And then you went and you did that. Yeah. And I think what Platt is getting at, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like when we're talking about RTS, right? Like this is the same thing when we talk about the distinction between macro and micro. Right? Both of them serve as 2 parts of the same whole, essentially. And when we talk about RTS, we are talking about macro and micro. You can have good strategy in terms of the macro. Like if you say, in this game, I'm going to revolt, and these are the things that I'm going to do to achieve that revolt in a timely manner and in a safe manner. There is strategy to that. I mean, you can kind of get into debates about whether or not, like, I watched a Lionheart video, I practiced it in a skirmish once, and I took it on the ladder, and it's like, okay, well, exactly how much of this is like strategy for you? I don't know. But let's say that, even a hand-me-down strategy is still a strategy in its inception, so we'll go with that. And then, however, there's no strategy within your micro either. Like, clicking a button in terms of like what to ship or like tasking settlers is not micro. It's not micro. It's not really thinking about the game. That's not really engaging in things. And I have coached so many new players, so many people just trying to get to average. And the desperation by which they cling to the single build order in that, especially when I'm teaching like people who are being introduced to the United States. And you can see my level there, almost 120. Like, I play a lot of United States. I played them right from release, so if anybody wants to get on me about, like, I'm a lamer or something like that, I've played them through every single patch. I understand the Civ. And just any amount of complication causes people to just find the path of least resistance and then just move towards that. And so it kind of, like, not only is the unpredictability of the revolt kind of like a sort of fun luck mechanic in terms of the coin flip maybe, but also it kind of threatens a little bit of the strategy element too, just by having that as an option always, and multiple options at that. Like, you don't really know. But the other part of it is that, like you're saying, is that now it's less now, and we can talk about that, but just that it's not really strategy when you're just kind of being whisked away into, like, these are the buttons I click, and if you stop me from clicking those buttons, then I lose, and if you let me click those buttons, then I win. And then the impetus is on your opponent, and then the problem is that sometimes you are equipped and sometimes you're not equipped, right? And at that point, you're talking about Civ selection micro, and so all these things kind of can leave a bad feeling. Especially the unpredictability. I think Mexico, like, I know you said that it's not really a problem, but I think that unpredictability, I think inherent within the Mexico kit, something about that really irks me, and I think that needs to be looked at again. And that's not to say that I like lose to Mexico all the time. I don't. It's just more of that, kind of an element of the RTS genre, I think, is like, this game is not like chess, but all RTS kind of harkens back to chess in a way. Like, there are moves that you can do that I know that you can do, and there are moves that I can do that I know that I can do, and that that I can do. And then that's kind of where you get into the scuffle, right? Is like, how are you choosing your moves and when? When you have it where it's like, I know what you could potentially be choosing, but I don't know until after it happens. is, I think, an inherent advantage. Now, I guess you could say that revolutions are all-ins technically for Mexico, but that's not necessarily always abundantly the case because you get multiple revolutions each age. So it's kind of like, meh.
With outs too, all of the revolts have inbuilt ways to recover their economy faster than you would think.
And that's probably the big thing right there, right? Is that recovering of the economy. That's really rough. And so I think we're better now just simply because, like you said, that we've kind of killed the turtle meta. Turtling is not dead, but it has been sufficiently hampered in a way that I think is very healthy. I think cost of cards, nerfing certain cards in H4, like what is that, Advanced Outpost or something, or I forget, where it's like building damage,
extensive fortification.
Yeah, there you go. The walling thing was a great change, I think. All those things, but still, I think that a lot of people just kind of, if you want to climb. So this is somebody who has now climbed from 700 elo to past 1300 elo. That's a massive amount of gain. I'm not some sort of high elo player, okay? But that's a huge gain. If you want to do that, watch a Lionheart video. And then don't do what the Lionheart video is showing you. Just anticipate that. Just anticipate the last like 5 videos in your games, and then you'll win. I promise you. The amount of times that I've gone on the ladder and you see like, oh well, some guy did a advanced market France FI into French revolt. Like, oh, I see a France player. Guess what he's doing? Guess what he's doing?
Yeah. No, it's so true. So many times from either myself or others, I'm like, oh, he's doing the Lionheart building. And I want to point out that I actually think that part is actually really healthy for a game, because what that's doing is driving innovation. You know, I saw a response on the forum saying that revolts should cost like 3,000 resources each. And, you know, even though, as you guys could guess, I'm not like a huge revolt fan, like my instinct was just to be like, get good. Like, are you serious? Like 9,000, like you just want to remove it. Like there's a whole difference between like toning something down or finding a way to, you know, integrate it, right? Like, you know, the same people that said wall nerfs were going to kill the game. The game's had consistent increase of numbers. We've had a bump in the beginning of summer that's kind of starting to peter off, which you expect for school, right? You know, younger people, or even adults that now have time now that their kids aren't in school or they're homeschooling, like they look at games like Age of Empires 3, they get into it. Majority don't stay for very long as any game. People have responded very positively, I think, to the concept of revolts. It excites them. It's something that they want to see. And the fact that people like Lionheart exploring it is fantastic because it allows showcasing of very complicated builds. Now, like you said, where it becomes a quote-unquote problem is, you know, one, balance, which it is what it is, but it needs to be very careful because we've had now in the last 2 years, we went from like patch to regularly, you know, we're at 6 months right now of no patch and no indication that we'll get one soon, other than they want to give us one before the DLC launches in late 2024. So anytime the devs mess with numbers, like we're stuck with that result for a long time, which is why I'm definitely not for radical or crazy solutions, because you know you're stuck with that world. And then 2, people really do need to adapt and move. I mean, metas shift. That's normal and healthy, but then as a player you have to shift. And I feel like revolts are going back to that core issue that Age of Empires 3 and the DE era has always had. I don't want to say the word an issue, but it's always been part of the game where there are people that just kind of robotically bot builds, and often there's maybe one or no counter. And again, there's no worse feeling in a strategy game. Like, to use your chess analogy, imagine if you went up against somebody and the first 5 moves they made, you were not allowed to take a piece off the board.
Yeah, that would be that'd be devastating, pretty much, because then they could just recklessly do whatever it is that they're gonna do, you know.
Right. You either wouldn't play it or you just want to play, white yourself, right? Because say it was white that had it. Like you just wouldn't care. I've been playing a lot of tabletop recently. Again, and one of the perennial things they're always trying to deal with is, how do you deal with somebody getting first turn, right? Because like they're gonna have the most fun. They get to kind of dictate the pace of the game. They get to put their stuff into position, and so many games have found some pretty good ways to handle it, which comes down to the idea of giving the opponent counterplay, whether it's out of activation shooting, whether it's the ability to redeploy units, move stuff out of the way, or give them more benefit to like scoring or scenario wins, right? Like making sure the second player gets some initiative in that area. And it's something that I realize when I come back to the concept of like a revolt or sometimes a lot of the Age of Empires 3 stuff that often is so missing is because you have no time to kind of like pause the clock or interject in a way. Like it's a real-time strategy game, but how much are you able to stop a revolt? Well, depending on your civ, but I would say unless you're one of the top 5 or 6 civs, not very often. You just kind of take it on the chin, and that's just not fun.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm somebody who says, kind of let legacy go, and you can embrace DE, and I understand inherently that there's just a lot of stuff in the game, right? That's really complicated, and all of it, should be able to be used. Is I think the dev philosophy is that they create things that are exciting, they create things that are fun for them and fun for us, and they want it to be used. Like when you build out the French Revolution, this whole thing, and then a revolt within a revolt, which is even more exciting, very cool, and you want players to be able to use it. You don't want it to just have this be this really crazy unobtainable thing that you never get to see in a practical way, unless you're in a skirmish or a comp stomp or something like that. And so that all that makes sense, and I think what we're trying to get at is that we acknowledge that, and we don't think necessarily that revolts are some sort of like overpowered thing that deserves this like its own specific discussion, but rather it is one of those things that it kind of complicates the RTS elements, I think, just by virtue of what it is. And that doesn't mean it's broken, but it just means that, once again, we're going back to, I think this has kind of been a conversation that we've always had, of that the game is very, very complex. And like when people simply say like, well, if you don't want somebody to revolt, then just rush them, or just do a classic semi-FF or something like that. And it's like, DE doesn't really lend itself anymore to the sort of like those tried and true formulas from 2007. They don't really apply anymore. Now, it's good to know the semi-FF, and it can work in certain scenarios, and it's just like something that you do. But typically what we're kind of working towards is like, how fancy can you get until you get like the specific pops that you need in order to be successful in the game. And then, there's a lot of various strategies in order to get to those like sort of power spikes. It feels like, honestly, like Age of Empires 3 DE feels like an anime battle. And in that, like and anime battles are terrible. Like, I know a lot of people, there's a lot of weebs that play this game. There's a lot of weebs in our Discord with like the stupid anime profile pics or something, and they think that like they are the character or something. I don't know. And like you'll see in an anime battle, right? Like especially in like what was the one, Naruto, right? Like if they fight, right, one person will do some sort of hand sign thing and they'll get a power, and then they're like, oh my god, they have this power. But wait a second, I can do this hand sign thing and then I get this power, and then now I'm like matched with them or like over them. And then they do this a couple times, and then like the trick is always like who gets the last power up that like allows them to get the win. It's like this like clever thing where like all of a sudden in the fight they're like suddenly they get this like switch up where they get this new power and they win out. It's a very like soft magic system. Like, I don't want to talk about magic systems, but like there's hard magic and soft magic. Hard magic being this like well-defined, very specific kind of empirically based thing in terms of like your power scaling system. Like, you think like Avatar: The Last Airbender, if you've seen that
Mm-hmm.
show, right? It's like it's very well defined, like the elements, how you fight, who's like where the strength comes from, how do you win. And then like you have like soft magic, which would be like a Harry Potter instance where like it's not exactly defined. There's like a lot of wiggle room. It can be whatever you kind of need it to be. Marvel's kind of also guilty of the same thing, right? Like where suddenly a hero just like wins.
Right, or he uses the phlebotom bakaba, whatever thing,
Right,
and
yeah, the
it's just
MacGuffin to shoot the space laser up into the sky, and then ta-da, and friendship
right,
happens.
not fry our atmosphere or kill everyone through ozone depletion
Correct.
or anything
Yeah,
like that. It just works.
you got to think about it. Like honestly, like the ozone layer in the Marvel universe is like it's gone. It's just radiation, just burning holes. Like the amount of
Right.
times. Oh, jeez. Anyway, basically AoE 3DE is like a soft magic system in which you're like in a sort of Naruto Shippuden fight with your opponent, where you're just kind of like trying to get like the pops out and then like see how things kind of land. And then the best games, funny enough, what people really like on any YouTube channel for Age of Empires 3, and this I think is the most interesting aspect, is that the game hits a sweet spot. Once you get past that like 40-minute mark, all the little tricks and power-ups that you get, they're gone. And then all of a sudden, all the things that you did previously in the game, like that raid that you got off at minute 8, start to make themselves apparent then. And then you start to see like really good, like that's where the like people say this is a really good game, like this is a really solid game, because it's like now it comes down to all the crazy micro and like a macro strategy of the economy and things like that. Like what was it? It was like Kevin versus Julian. I don't know if you saw that. Like Lionheart casted a Kevin versus Julian game where Kevin was playing Italy, God bless him, and Julian was playing Dutch. And it was just like, I mean, like it was a swing back and forth, like for sure. And like you had the kind of pops and things like that were going on a little bit there. But for the most part, it was just like once you got through it, you had this like really solid play. And neither of them revolted actually. Or wait, no. I think Julian went South Africa. See, that's the funny thing. Then he went South Africa to win it out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually kind of an interesting case example. I didn't realize that. So it kind of goes back to that, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, well he had to kind of, and maybe that's the point of the revolt. Like you got to finish it, right? So and that's kind of like a good example maybe of your revolution, but that's kind of what it feels like now in terms of like, but making sense, like tying
No,
that
you
into
are.
the revolt mechanic.
I was gonna say like DE revolts are more soft, but I think that the game in general, Age of Empires 3 was always more like a hard magic, where you had shipments and pulses of kind of positioning and power and back and forth, and you often tried to ship your game winner, whether it was Spahi or Mamluks or two Falks or two heavies or like some merc shipment, right? Like that's always been part of the game, and I feel like everybody loves that. And I think people like the ideas of revolt because it gives you so much like a playground to play around with, but it's so hard to find that happy middle ground, where a revolt is like a final push, but it's a final counterable push. It's something that you have to like lull your opponent into the false sense of security. And I think like that's happened so many times in Age of Empires 3. Sometimes there's just too much. There's just too much of something. Again, Mexico being a revolt civ, like most of the complaints are like, man, this civ should only have like one revolt per an age or two revolts per an age, or spread them out, combine some. Like this is just such a nightmare to fight against. I mean, it's the same thing, something I've kicked around for a long time. I wish that if you revolted, it would give your, a countdown to your opponent, and you can do something fun, like do a reference to the revolt, like, for Sheila, it could be like San Martin crosses the Andes, for the Baja Revolt, you could be like, I forget the name of it, Walker, right? Walker's been spotted going down to Sonora, like you could do fun stuff that just gives your opponent a little bit of time to react. And that way he can make the counters, or at least start to. And it doesn't necessarily negate the impact of a revolt, but it allows the revolt to remain strong while still having counterplay. Other things that could happen would be if if your opponent's revolting, like if it just pulls to where all their stuff was for a quick second. Typically revolutions were very apparent to the surrounding nations, and it really wasn't until the 20th century or in smaller countries that you wouldn't really know what's going on. I guess it depends. Like I know the British were pretty aware of France and everything that was going on with that. Um, we obviously, the United States, knew about Walker's little escapade down in Mexico. But it's just something to give some counterplay to bring some of that hard back. So there is a rule where if it's like, all right, I now know my opponent revolting. I know what he is. I mean, the revolution button's what, 20 seconds?
Yeah.
So it does give your opponent time to back off, which does kind of kill some of the fun of getting the gotcha, but it allows revolutions to not just be an all-in, or at least some revolutions that it would do that for, because I think that's the worst feeling when you have to push under an opponent that's is revolting, but you don't know what they're revolting to. I think that would get rid of that bad taste. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that's that's a potential option. It's one of those things. It's so difficult because you're like, well, if I pull on this thread, then all of a sudden you get these other impacts. And I know the devs, probably are looking at that and they're like, I don't know. I think the most egregious offender of all this is Mexico, and I think that Mexico, the idea of them like returning to Mexico and then getting like some of the cards and then also going to H4 and all that kind of stuff. I think revolting, whatever that may look like, I can't define it specifically, but if Mexico revolts or if anybody revolts, it should be a shot in the arm. It should be a strong change, because that's what revolutions are, right? It's strong political, social, institutional upheaval that led to a lot of chaos internally and externally for whatever civilization may have taken part in that. And I think that should be a trade-off. Like inherently, and now you can say like, well, it is a trade-off because I lose my settlers. Yeah, but they also become revolutionaries. Mm-hmm. I think that like it's not a crazy thing to imagine that if I revolt to, I don't know, the revolutionary France, that I lose a portion of my CDB and they don't become sans culotte. Okay, mm-hmm. Like that's what a revolt does, right? It's like it's a violent upheaval. Or maybe you lose some buildings or something like that. I don't know, but I think there are ways to make it a trade-off. I think there are ways to maybe warn the opponent, and I'm not. This is one of those like more nuanced topics, and that it doesn't really, like you said. I think you said it very beautifully in that the patches are going to be more stretched out. Thank God. I think that's a very good thing. I don't really care what anybody says, like where they're like, no, we need patches and we need them yesterday. And I'm like, no, you got to let the meta settle. You got to let players kind of figure things out and explore. And that's kind of why we're having a conversation about revolutions specifically right now, because we are exploring and finding these other mechanics that kind of add to balance and take away, and there's a give and take. But yeah, that's what I would say in terms of revolutions. But I also say like there's also like a cultural bit here in terms of the community, because there's the perception of balance, there's the perception of the state of the game, and it's like we have people, Lionheart specifically, love him, like, and I'm super appreciative of having gotten to know him, and I think he's a great guy. And I love that he was able to help with our videos and plug our channel, not knocking him at all. I mean this in the best way possible. Is that he's casting his games what he's interested in, no issue, and that disseminates down into the community. And so I think it gives the perception, right, that you need to revolt, or the perception that like, well, the pros are doing it, these top level players are doing it, so therefore I should do it because that's what the successful strategy is. But then what happens is that it doesn't work for them, and then they have this issue, or maybe it does work, but then it's this like super messy thing, and it becomes this issue because then they're like, well, this is a lack of balance or whatever, and there's no like you said, that mentality of get good. And that's why like the second half of our conversation is probably going to be about Juan the Hunter and the longest thread on the forums ever, because it's that same kind of mentality of like, well, I've seen this from these players and that's how it is, and in his case that's actually the opposite. But my point still stands of like, there's this perception of how things should go that's not fulfilled because maybe you suck or something like that, and then You have to be like, oh, okay, well, I have this perception of what balance is and how the game should be played because somebody told me that, or I think somebody told me that. And I'm disappointed when that's not the case. They never bothered to learn the nuts and bolts.
Right. I mean, look at Lakota. Everybody was calling it low LOW Coda 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everybody. And
Right.
funnily enough, it was lows like our good friend Juan there, who had probably been like, I don't know, I'm getting the piss rated out of me. Like, this feels fucking miserable.
Yeah.
Excuse my French. And then it was Keister who had looked at the advanced market card, which again, all the pros said was garbage, and now suddenly they're all crying for Lakota nerfs. Now, is Lakota overpowered in the current meta? I think there's a fairly strong argument for it. But I think it just goes to kind of show you, like, one of the strengths of things cooling off is it's no longer flavor of the month. Like, these civs have had time to breathe, and these revolts, which, I mean, how often you don't get to revolt every game. Even a civ like Spain, which I'm I'm picking on Spain and like Otto and Portugal. It's not guaranteed to get to do it every single game. So it's taken a lot of time, and I do think that's one of the benefits of the patch slowing down. I know there's again people that are like, if I don't have a patch every day, if the developer doesn't come into my Discord and give me a croissant, this game is dead. And it's like, no, if you're playing it, the game is not dead, but whatever.
Right. Inherently, it's contradictory, yeah.
But there's been a whole cohort of people raised on the DE, and it's good in a way that a lot, like I saw a Reddit post today, and somebody pointed out that, like, I think it actually was us who kind of talked about like how the old guard was kind of stuck in their ways and they held a lot of stuff back, right?
Yeah.
So we picked on old Rich. Now we're gonna pick on new Rich, the nouveau Rich, right? And there are so many people that got far on DE based on their ability to like use DE mechanics that now that those mechanics are being brought in line and they're losing consistently for civs like France or Germany or Britain that are very good at rewarding good macro, good micro, kind of classical RTS skills. Like, they're feeling like this stuff is either unbalanced or fine, when the reality is if you take away their DE mechanics, they'd be far below that person, right? And so it's kind of a tough one where it's like, okay, you're good, but are you really as good as you think you are? Like, are you universally good, or are you just really good at narrowing down a selection of buttons to imprint? Which, again, there's a skill to that. I don't want to like be facetious and say that's all it is, but I can tell you that the current crop of like 2000 and under, that every map that I watch a lot of streams, but I would say half the streams I watch, no one's explored more than 50% of the map before they go for their all-in push.
Yeah. I'll take the beam out of my own eye, and I'll talk about a game that I was streaming for you, actually, and I was playing on Deccan, which, like, if a dev is watching this, remove that from the map pool, please. Nobody in this community wants Deccan in the freaking 1v1 map pool. I'm sorry, like, that is just wow. Anyway, we're playing on that, and if you remember, like, this is a Japan player that I was playing against. I was playing Britain, and the Japan player was doing great. I mean, he was doing a classic, just super classic, Japan build of like getting the eco going, pushing out the H2 units, and then starting to like slowly take that map, putting the shrines down in the center, all that kind of stuff. You know what I did? I FF'd, put down a church, got Blackwatch, Tomahawk, Falconet, Rangers sent, and we did a little bit of a base trade, and he lost, like, just like that. It was like, what, a 9-minute game, I think, at the most. 10 minutes. And yep. You were remarking, you're like, yeah, man, this is like classic Japan from 2008, 2009. He was solid playing it, and it just didn't matter. Now, here's the thing, though, is that would Britain in today's meta, like, if I played Britain in a legacy way, could I have defeated the Japanese player in a legacy way? I don't know. Probably not. And so it's kind of like, well, what's fair to Britain? That's a good conversation and all that kind of stuff. And like, maybe he should be anticipating that, but like, no shot. You're setting up your shrines, you're building your units, whatever. And then like these Highlanders and these Falconets start coming down and they just wipe you.
And it's not like you hid the church in the back or you did like a sneaky side
No, not at all.
tower shipment or anything
Nope.
like that. Like
Nope.
it was totally there to read, and this is a very popular Brit build at the moment.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And
you know,
so yeah, that kind of gets into what you're talking about, right? Is like, well, there's these power spikes, right, that exist tit for tat, and I did my power spike and he didn't do his, and then I just ran him over because I embraced that DE mechanic. And so it's like, well,
and that's kind of fun that you can turn stuff like, again, metas need to change, like they need to evolve. You want civs to keep their unique identity, but again, for the tabletop, I've been playing Warhammer 40,000, which, God, the price is might as well be $40,000. But I've been playing since the second edition. They're now in 10th edition. I've played competitively, but mostly kind of casual. And the army that I have played has changed dramatically. I mean, I still have my same units, but I have to rethink how I play the Eldar every edition. And it can be frustrating, especially when like old armies and sometimes even models that like I painted and stuff change or are invalidated in their current way, and I have to either, some of it's just a business, you have to buy more stuff, or you have to dig really deep and come up with new creative ways with what you have, and that's what keeps me engaged. Like I can't just, I wouldn't, if I could just buy one army composition and just do it forever, like I wouldn't play that forever. It's a law of diminishing returns. It's human nature. So having these is good, to put you kind of an example. Like if I saw you facing into a revolt and I said, okay, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and you were just like, well, I'm not going to do that, and then you lost and got mad, it'd be like, well, like, what did you do?
yeah, you asked
And
for it.
I think with a lot of the new players, like, yes, I think the old guard was more mechanically skilled. I do think the skill ceiling in Age of Empires 3 has dropped a bit, but that doesn't mean it's less fun. In fact, I hate to say it, but now, especially that I've not been grinding as hard, like as a more casual person, I have more fun when I play. Plus, it's Madonna who scarred me for life with those goddamn cannoneers. But I have more fun. There's a lot of stuff to play around with. There's different things. There's still micro. There's still macro. Like it's still part of the game. But and even being farther away, like remembering old builds, I find that like a lot of people suffer. I semi-FF'd a 1500 elo player as France, first with 10 Musk and then with Huss, and he accused me of being a Smurf while he was playing as Spain because I just semi-FF Skirm Goon. Like he thought I was going to revolt every time, and I'm like, why would I revolt? Like you're Spain. I'm just gonna go to age 3, get a bunch of Skirm Goons, some cure, and 2 Falcons, and take the Chile revolt or Argentina revolt on the chin. Like that, this is how the game was played for like over a decade, dude.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting that you're saying that it's the skill ceiling and it's a little bit easier, and I do think that like in the DE, where I think the best way to explain what we're trying to get at, because it may sound like super negative and that we're kind of like now swinging towards the legacy side of things. I'm like, no. I think DE is better than legacy, like flat out. I personally feel that completely, and I think that's because DE is a much more streamlined experience. I think that there are strategies that you can pick up, that you can learn, and then you can build from there. And I think the devs have done a fantastic job. If they have listened to this point, there you go. Thank you. They've done a fantastic job of streamlining the experience and making it more accessible. But the weird thing about it has been, it's kind of been a double-edged sword in that the streamlined experience, especially like going to revolts and getting these massive power spikes that exist in the game, as part of the function of a streamlined experience, right? The other side of it has been like the growth and the complexity of the game, going back to that sort of like width and depth, right? The game has grown increasingly more complex. I'm not only learning the Civ and all the potential counters, but I can also learn what the Civ can become. I'm learning about like all the various like ins and outs, right? So like, for example, with Russia, right? Probably not the best Civ right now on the ladder. I think there's a lot of unexplored mechanics in there, right, that we're probably going to figure out at some point. people still always doing the classic 5-4 Cossack rush. But those counter dragoons, I think people are sleeping on it. I think they have a Church FF, Church FI, just the same as anybody else. They can be equally as effective. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of that, because that's another little thing that you're going to need to know and be prepared for. Like, maybe the 1 to 2 strategies that Russia always has, but then there are other ones that are, because we keep adding these little mechanics in order to kind of streamline the experience and get you spun up into the game. So all of that presents a kind of, just a general issue. And then maybe somebody could even say, I don't know if I would make this argument, but you could say, well, because of the complexity of it and because of all the little power spikes and stuff like that, you kind of sometimes just have to return to form. And like, in an odd way enough, like just being able to do a really solid semi-FF as is the days of yore under the reign of Kaiser Klein, would be your best bet in those situations. And like, you can't top it in those kinds of games that you may face up against. But then I just say, yeah, no thanks, and then I FF into 3 Gatling guns and like, ta-da. Yeah, cool.
No, definitely. What I mean, things trend, I think, positively. With long periods in between, it's easy to get doom and gloom. I definitely feel like there's a feeling of doom and gloom at, like, quote-unquote, the competitive edge. But when I go do, like, more casual stuff, people are pretty content with this game. And I think that really speaks volumes, again, to the devs' mission overall succeeding. But, of course, like anything in life, right? Not to be too political, but when a government makes a choice, there's always a cost and an effect, right? And I think the cost has been at some of the competitive viability, especially at the higher level. Again, I think one of the reasons Lionheart is so popular is because he's a great guy. He's fun to listen to, and his vids are really fun, right? But like the competitive scene of Age of Empires 3 is kind of sputtered. And again, you have people at like every level that notice stuff, and they have these grand ideas on how things could be, and it's like, well, it's almost like a relationship. Like, if you fall in love with someone, but you're having a fight, like, you're not going to turn around. Hopefully not. Some of you probably do. You sick.
Yeah.
Sick people. You don't demand that your partner change everything about them to suit your needs, right? Like, you find common ground. And I think with this game, yes, all these revolts are frustrating. Yes, there will be balance changes. We do know that USA and Argentina are for review, whatever that means, balance-wise, and when and if we get a patch before the DLC. But you as a player, like, if you don't like all these revolts, like, maybe it's time to try some of the revolts or try some of the other DE stuff and explore it. And if you're just doing revolts all of the time, you probably have a lot of mechanics that you're neglecting, and that as a player you are going to hit a ceiling. And hopefully you have some humility to think, okay, all I do is bot revolts. So if Joe Micro King adjusts and kicks my ass, that doesn't mean my revolt is not OP. It just means he's better than me. It's a hard one, but I think as a community, you kind of have to, like, hopefully, and I think we are, come together and say, okay, well, we're not going to be uber competitive, but we're also not going to, like, just accept things that the way they are. We're going to try to improve things. We're going to try to come up with new things and take this complex game to the absolute limit before we make the largest post in history calling Ungers the noob for aging up with 14 fills. It's Russia.
Yeah, I think, and I don't think Juan the Hunter is like, okay, we'll put a link in the description because we've mentioned this a couple times now. There's a very, very, very long thread, which I think is still going. It's become sort of like the red eye of Jupiter, just this like perpetual storm.
Which, to cut off, we do have one of those games casted on the way, because I know a lot of the forum guys were asking about that. So
yeah,
spoiler.
That's the two of us casting that one, and it's not really a cast. It's more of like a, hey, buddy, what are you doing?
Right.
So basically, really quick, is that we have a gentleman who I won't say is nice, but he is a person, I think, and he's in the 900 elo range, and he is just fighting for his life in the forums, calling everybody wrong about Russia, because he stated that Russia just needs more blockhouses because they obviously can't, I don't know, like exert map control or be successful like compared to other civs because they don't get enough blockhouses. And people are like, you're wrong. And then he was like flexing his like treaty elo or something like that. I don't know. Basically, like, we'll put a link. But like 900 something elo, like if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, whatever, and it's like, no, brother, listen to me. Like 1050 elo is the average. It is the top of the parabola. So if you are at 950 elo, you are not far off from that top of the parabola. You are like just a few games away. Like that ain't like, that's the player base, you know. And then so you have this sort of mentality of like, yeah, I've watched that, I've done my research, and I know what I'm talking about, and done it. And then you're gonna fight for 300 pages on the forum to your position and basically call everybody like a liar, a hypocrite, whatever. Now I understand that Juan the Hunter is probably like a very special case in terms of his ability to like troll online, and I really appreciate it. But it's the same thing though. It's like like what we're getting out of this sort of like disseminating down information and like perceptions of like the state of the game and what balance is really supposed to look like. And you know, somebody could easily say, well, you know, like let him languish in that elo bracket then, if that's what his plan is. But then at the same time, it's like, well, he does have a voice, and a lot of people have a voice, and you can really skew perceptions like for the community writ large, actually, on what the game is like and how it's supposed to be played. And that can impact numbers, that can impact balance, that can impact a whole bunch of things. And we shouldn't just like ignore that in favor of like, I don't know, like looking at how Julian plays and saying like, well, this is how it goes for everybody. It's like, no, not really.
The appeal to authority, and that's just a common human trait, but I do find, because this game is so confusing, people tend to ground themselves in like it's not the perfect word, but like the ideologies of certain figures in the Age of Empires 3 community, right? And it can kind of be funny because like if you just are a bit contrarian like I am, like you can just watch them get really frustrated fast because their entire arguments are often predicated on, well, so and so said this, look at this game and tell me. And it's like, well, their opponent was trolling. This doesn't mean anything, you know. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Their opponent did this very common troll build because he just doesn't like that guy and he likes to mess with his head. Like, this has nothing to do with like balance. Like, you need to have something to back it up. And you know, I know people care about tier lists so much, you know, and it's just like, you know, okay, if you think that Dutch is an A tier civ, which is a claim one player does honestly make, it's like that doesn't change the fact that he's going to be up against people or civs that wreck him over 70% of the time. Like that, how does that help or bring anything productive into this conversation? You know, I think, you know, Juan's kind of an extreme, but I actually admire the fact that at least he's willing to go down and back his stuff up with his own words and his own train of thought. And I definitely think we need that more. You know, again, something that ESOC really promoted back in the day, one of the reasons the game was kept alive is because they made sure there was constant communication. And it wasn't, I mean, yeah, a lot of it came down to dick writing so-and-so or who and who, right? Like, but most of the time it was a place where even pros could be challenged for their beliefs and they would kind of defend themselves. And because they're pros, they usually could in a logical way, right? You know, like they knew their stuff. And I do think that's missing a lot. You know, even I see it in individual discords, but it's not centralized. Like I enjoy watching, like someone like Lionheart will give his views on civs and expand upon it. And while I don't agree with all of it, like I can at least usually respect like where he's coming from, because it's like you made sense. You know, a big conversation is Lakota and Aztec. Are they overpowered or not? Like Aztec players will say, no, the civ's not. But when confronted with data, they will not just rationalize it, but actually process through why they think it's that way. And in a weird way, I almost wish that the balanced Discord wasn't this like not secret, publicly known secret cabal of players allegedly moving the strings, because it you know, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a community to raise a game. And whether it's through events, whether it's through discussion, whether it's through coming together to do stuff and have a place to meet and disseminate information, not being centralized, I think, continues to be one of the biggest barriers. In Age of Empires 2, we were on Voobly. Before that, we were on ESO Online. We had the Forgotten Empire mod page, or even as modders, they always had information readily available. And forums are gone. Discord is the future. I get that, but I still wish we had a web page. And like kind of like what Free Food Party's doing. Shout out to those boys because those boys are amazing. It just like expanded where we had builds and guides. Julian came out with a guidebook. You have to. It is behind a paywall, but it is very extensive. I must say, for the value of his guides are, if you are dedicated to advancing up the ladders, is a good value. But for the casual person that's already spent $20 and doesn't want to spend that much again just for guides necessarily, like we need places to do builds like the old strategy wall and old threads in ESOC. And I feel like if we could just get past that last barrier with the increased numbers, a DLC on the way, this community could hit like the next tier where we're getting close to like Age of Empires 4 consistent numbers.
Yeah,
I guess that'd be my call to action.
That's a good, I think, call to action. I like that a lot. I'll have to kind of sit and muse on that, and maybe we can go and plan something because, we don't have much institutional power, but we have some to kind of pull strings. But yeah, man, I think that appeal to authority is just probably the biggest logical fallacy that I see the community engaged in on a pretty frequent basis. Just like even seeing arguments in our own Discord about how, like, listen, Julian made a product, he's allowed to sell the product. I'm a big believer in the free market. But people saying that he can and should sell guides at the price that he has it pegged at because of his elo is like a very strange thing to me. I think a lot of people point out, well, I saw this person doing it, or I saw this video, and so then therefore that's the case, and it's just like, it's not a data set. You have one example on one map between two specific kinds of players that you're calling on as a sort of like a rule regarding a civ, and like it's not good. I mean, that's just like one step above anecdotal at that point, and it's like you can't just make any sort of assertion based on that. And so I think there's a lot of that like appeal to authority that's going on. That happens, and it can be kind of troublesome because then not only do you have people kind of stuck in terms of, well, monkey see, monkey do, they're doing it, they're saying this, so therefore this is the case, but also then it drives a disconnect between the upper crust in terms of elo and the people who have like really been involved in the game and in the community for a long time, and the average player, and trying to convince people that like the average player and how to improve their gameplay, and being like, hey, like, this is like, don't look at this, don't listen to this, like you need to kind of get back to brass tacks in terms of just like play what you enjoy, learn to love the game, learn your civ, learn how to attack, move, make control groups, things like that, and yeah, the appeal to authority, man, I think that's been a killer. That's been a really big killer, actually, for a very long time. Actually, I never really thought about it to any extent. I've kind of argued with it here and there of like, hey, like you're just saying like, you saw a lot with Ravnak too. Like, you have all that kind of Ravnak, arguments, whatever, about like, him and his like cast of characters, I guess, in terms of like a high elo, they're the ones allowed to have the balanced discussion because in their games it's just pure gameplay. It's not mistakes, it's not like fluff, it's pure art, it's pure gameplay, and so therefore now balance is able to be discussed. And it's like, no. that's not how things work.
No, I just interject really fast. One of the best quotes I ever heard was Kaiser watching a stream, and I forget what people were trying to say, but like someone was trying to correct someone for questioning like either what he was doing or what he was saying about a cast. And, in just classic nonchalant Kaiser, he's like, hey, I'm gonna let you know a little secret. I can't do a French accent, but he's like, we're all shit. I'm shit, you're shit, and if I'm shit, think about shit you are. He's like, we're all shit, so just watch the game and have fun.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
why are you guys arguing in the comments? Like, just watch the game and see what happens. Like,
Yeah. And I'm sure Twitch streams are just filled with that, of just this like just the most nonsense back and forth that you can imagine. I mean,
And I'm guilty of it. Don't get me wrong. I think it's, um, something that I've had to take a step back, like I said, from Age of Empires 3. For those who know, I got a kiddo on the way here in September, and so like I've had to, be more supportive to my wife and help her with more things. And just in general, having this perspective of this pursuit, this like insane, sweaty grind of Age of Empires 3, or really any game, like it has to stop. Um, because it's just not going to be a healthy part of my life to do it at this time. And so I've been kind of looking from the outside again, which is something that, whether it's arguing about balance or arguing about mechanics, but more of this view of like, none of this really matters that much. Like, there's so much more important things, and like what's more fun and more rewarding is like having a good time. And seeing people that are still locked into the same mindset myself has been guilty of, which is like, we gotta nerf this. The game needs to be like this, it needs to be like this, and it's just like, it's not. It's not what it is. If you listen to a lot of the old timers that are still around, they're very kind of sarcastic.
mm-hmm.
Not because they want to be meaning to people, but just because their outlook over time has been like, yeah, these changes. There's OP stuff. There's new builds. There's counters. There's builds. Some things do have to be nerfed. Other things won't be nerfed. Like it's just part of life. Are you really going to get that upset? And I think, again, to kind of come full circle, like when it comes to stuff like revolts, like if you're really that frustrated with revolts, like it's okay to take a break. Like it's okay to or not do the latter for a while. And in fact, if enough people did that, the devs would pay attention, because if the numbers dipped, like that's their money. So you don't have to write an angry forum post trying to force the game the way that you want it to be. You don't have to just be in this mindset of just following what somebody else says because you don't understand it. Just chill and play the game. And I assure you that yes, these revolts are, so I laugh my ass off too sometimes. They're ridiculous, yes. But you have a choice as a person on how much you want to suffer. And if revolts really are pissing you off, take a break, or stop caring about your elo and just resign. Who cares if the other guy? I know that's like messes with competitive people's heads, the idea of somebody winning and you losing, but like if you're just gonna be pissed off all day, like just resign and move on to the next one. Or try to grow as a person and fight it, and if you lose, you just shrug, because who cares? The person used an OP revolt. Yeah, Spain did Argentina again. When you guys step away from the computer, like, none of that matters. Just have a good time and enjoy the community.
Yeah, and also like the meta is stable right now in terms of like we don't have any really patches on the horizon, which is good, because then it you can sit down and kind of workshop it and try to figure out how to kill it before it starts, or beat it in the midst of it. But we did already discuss like there's potential there to kind of give the player some opposing counterplay, but for the most part, I think the sort of more casual options and strategies that are open and available to people to kind of streamline the experience has been a sort of net positive in terms of accessibility. The game is made for all sorts of people. It can't just be made for just the small clique of people that were still around for like ESOC patches when it came to the legacy game. So that's all well and good. So yeah. I don't think.
Sorry, I was gonna say, as we kind of get ready to wind down this conversation, I was gonna say, the most that I find myself missing from Age of Empires 3, having been away from it for so long, isn't always necessarily the game, but what I miss is being able to like come out after work, open up a stream, and having all of you guys, whether it's shit talking my bad micro, or helping coming up with ideas, or just like the cheerleading me through some like crazy revolution, like that's what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
I think back to Age of Empires 2, I always think of the good games I had in my Black Forest with my buddies at like a pretty high level doing crazy stuff. Like there's just so much like joy that this game can bring. And I think instead of going online and arguing that you know better than everybody, or just following what somebody else says, like try to find your community, and if you do, whether it's single player, whether it's co-op games, whether it's just lobbies, find your own fun, make your own meta. I mean, we've ran events here. We're not the most skilled people, and we've done it all, and we've house ruled all sorts of stuff. You do the same thing in tabletop, man. Like, if you know the devs are gonna have like a OP faction, you know, you just house rule it so you and your buddies have a good time, and that's Sunbros. I mean, that's the core. I think that's why our group is so has done so well, despite the fact that we have no aspirations of being competitive. We have no aspirations of deciding, you know, how things should be, and that we're the voice of the people or anything like that. No, the core identity of Sunbros is we're just normal people having a good time, and I think that's what's, you know, Age of Empires 3 leans into so well. So I think with that, like, I again, speaking of wife and kids, I gotta go. It's almost 9 or 8 o'clock here, but any final thoughts?
Yeah, just one, and that's, hey, sometimes it's not the game that's wrong or bad, it's you. And sometimes it's not you.
Yeah.
There you go.
The only way you'll know is if you step away for a second, right?
Yeah. But do your best to eliminate it being you.
Yes.
All right. With that being said, you head off. I'll send us out. Everybody, thank you so much for listening and tuning into this podcast episode on the Age of Sunbros YouTube channel. We really appreciate you guys and your patronage, listening to us ramble and talk about revolts, state of the game, perceptions of balance, and other YouTubers. If you are interested in this content and want to see more of it, please feel free to subscribe. Go ahead and leave a like, comment, let us know what you thought, and we will see you guys in the next one.